Hello, my name is Greta Kiddo, and I am here because I really just wanted to do a research project but couldn't justify one. But I'm here to ask the question, why do we fear growing up? Really, the question is, why do we fear growing up, and how is this influenced by and reflected in the media we consume as teenagers? But that's too long and less catchy. So I really noticed this trend starting in around December last year on TikTok, where Andrew Garfield was trending with his song from Tick Tick Boom 3090 about being scared to turn 30 and how you've kind of accomplished nothing. And around the same time was Bo Burnham's song 30, with the similar themes of turning 30 and not really feeling like you've accomplished much. So I was like, why is this so prevalent? And I saw also the trend, where every year you cry on your birthday, and why is that? And really, I think Gen Z does a good job of romanticizing being young and kind of the younger generation, and how millennials are older and how cringe. So I think we as a generation have started to kind of fear growing up as a culture. So I was wondering if this could be traced in past generations and their coming of age films. So what I did is I looked at the different decades of in American culture, starting with the 50s and going to the 10s, to see if there was a prevalent theme of being scared to grow up, or if that was just unique to our generation, and what does that mean for us. Alright, so over here is where I'm going to put the scholars I'm citing and what they say. So my first scholar is Timothy Shea. He wrote the book Teen Movies, American Youth on Screen. He also started in the 50s. I basically not really stole, because it's not really an outline to just go through the decades, but he did the same thing. So I got a lot of my movie recommendations from him. And the other author that I'm going to cite is Thomas M. Leach in The World According to Teen Pics. He really only talked about two generations, and that is in the 50s and in the 80s. But he had important ideas that I think are carried on even to this day to this next generation. So before I jump into this starting in the 50s, I want to introduce you guys to the board behind me and just kind of how I'm going to do this. So over here, I'm going to have the honorable mentions, just movies that are coming of age and were prevalent in the culture and kind of represent a subgenre, but weren't really relevant to our main question or narrative, what we're looking at. So that's where they all go. Over here, I'll have 4 movies for each decade, in which I think encapsulate kind of their coming of age movement, that aren't oddballs or underground hits or anything, but they'll have to do with the question of growing up and what does that mean, a coming of age narrative, as if you will. So that's where these will go. And then over here, I have what lesson do we learn in regards to growing up, because that's what I was looking for. And then here I'll say what our scholars are saying. I'll trace kind of the different genres that are prevalent in coming of age films. And I'll include TV shows when TV shows become relevant. Also, this is my fish tank. Sorry, it's in the shot. I'll move it when we are down here. So, with that said, Leach introduces the troubled teen prototype for Rebel Without a Cause. Really, this means teens were being ignored, kind of, and they needed to be spoken to. He proposed that their problems are their parents' failures. This can be seen in Rebel Without a Cause, and James Dean's character trying to overcompensate in his masculine ways, muscly ways, for his dad's feminine qualities, where he kind of doesn't conform to society stereotypes. Not that there's anything wrong with that. James Dean thinks there is, and that's where our conflict is. Or in Plato, the character who's trying to fulfill found family because his parents abandoned him. Leach also includes the quote, newly mature children setting standards for their parents' adulthood in the context of generational development. So what this means is the children are acting like parents. There's that one scene where James Dean, Plato, and the girl character were all walking through the house, and they were pretending to like look at it like it was real estate, like they were gonna buy it, like they were a family unit. And this is something they all lacked at home, because I mentioned the other two, and then the girl's home issue is that like her dad doesn't love her or want to hug her. So they're trying to be what their parents weren't. They're trying to conform to society standards. They're trying to love their children, or Plato in this hypothetical or scenario. And then Leach's third point is that the audience is self-critical adults and future adults. This fundamentally is not a movie for kids. It's not supposed to be. It's for children, it's for adults that want to kind of understand their place in society. So that's that on Rebel Without a Cause. Don't worry. Oh. Something else I did want to mention is, let's go back to Timothy Shea's point of view on the 50s. Juvenile delinquency, and you need to do something. There wasn't really a teen subculture before the 50s. It was just adults and people who became adults and children. They kind of had their own movies, like, not that Disney movies and the such were for children, but yeah. That's not for now. So then I did want to go in our honorable mentions. Here we have The Wild One, 1954. It was a Marlon Brando picture. It kind of outlined what a biker delinquent guy is in the pop culture. Not that he was a teen in the movie, because it's the 50s. We can't have teens in movies. Really why I mention it is because it explored a subculture. And that's also why I have Easy Rider, because they're connected in the same way. Easy Rider was more of the hippie movement. It's from 69, so there's some weed, but they both explore different teen subcultures that popped up and were consequently impacting the youths that watched these popular movies, because that was Dennis Hopper and an early Jack Nicholson. So these were like bigger names, so the teens would want to see them more. Not that they wouldn't. What lesson do we learn? The threat of losing the next generation to delinquency. It's not really a lesson, but that's what all these movies are really about. It's about not wanting to lose this next generation, not wanting to have them abandon us in the future as adults. So that's the 50s. Welcome to the swingin' 60s. This is a weird time in our teen movie kind of journey, because there aren't really any. Well, there are, but like it's before the genre really took off and people started making like abundance of them. So we have a couple. It's not gonna be the usual, because I'm gonna try to do 4 for every decade, but here I only have 2. And time is relative. Like this one, I Was a Teenage Werewolf is from 1957, but like I'm putting it in the 60s because it's part of the kind of movement that took place in the 60s, which is horror. So first, the plot of I Was a Teenage Werewolf is just this teenager. He has like anger management issues, and then this scientist experiments on him, and he becomes a werewolf. He terrorizes this girl and like everyone at school. But the point I want to kind of like highlight is he becomes a werewolf as a result of the science experiment. So this is kind of indicative of the times of the 60s, where everyone was worried about the nuclear war and nuclear fallout, and just kind of where science was the perceived enemy of kind of like the public. It was the unknown. They didn't really understand it, so it was like scary. So that was kind of like reflected in the horror movies that came out of that time. Think of like The Blob, because that was as a result of like a science experiment. There's also like ones where like giant ants terrorize everyone and stuff. A lot of the horror from this time is just science going bad. Think of like also Spider-Man's origin happened around this time. It's because of radiation. We didn't understand radiation. It has to do with this. So it was the enemy. It was scary. It created this unknown. So because there was this other scary thing, children kind of weren't brought in as like a part of the scariness, because if you'll see, I'll tell you later in the future if you keep watching, the way like children and like teens are brought into horror as like elements of the horror, as either like the attacker or the attackee. And during this time, that kind of like wasn't the main issue that people were talking about. This was also around the time drive-ins are theaters where you drive in. I don't need to explain that. But who would go to these teenagers? What do teenagers not mind watching? Horror movies. It's something to do on a Friday night, and then you get like scared. You can snuggle up. You can make out. It's fine. It's fun. So they're gonna show teenagers in these movies to attract teenage audience. This is a trend. The other movie I want to talk about is kind of indicative of this other trend, and that is Beach Party from 1963. So there's no real plot. It's just kind of like, excuse me. It's just teens having fun at the beach. There's music. It's Frankie Avalon who's a singer, so there's music. Yeah, it's really just showcasing these kind of good old American teens and just their summer. It is the peak of kind of this no worries like aesthetic movement of just, yeah, they're teens. They don't have to worry about anything. It's the summer. Good times had by all. Think like Beach Boys and how it's just kind of like fun party music. Those are the vibes. There's no plot there, so this is just kind of a trend that took over and was shown also at the drive-ins and just kind of like featured teens more. With that said, honorable mentions is both from the 50s. I Do What I Want. So the first is Gidget, which is part of the beach trend. This girl Gidget wants to learn to surf, but she's a girl, but she does it anyway, and I think she falls in love with the guy who teaches her. I mention it here because it spawned a lot of sequels. She goes to Rome, I think, in one of them. Welcome to the 70s. It's groovy, man. It's far out, dude. So I want to start out, as I will with like all of these decades, with the scholars and what they're saying. So from the leech's end, we have this little paragraph that I wrote. Psycho Slasher Halloween, John Carpenter's 1978, and Hughes' team bonding films from the 80s, which we'll get to, mark a departure in history of relations between commercial American cinema and its audience. They reflect and foster a specifically teenage sensibility quite without precedent in earlier American films. What does this mean? So, new relationship between cinema and the audiences. This is when the teens are still going out, they need somewhere to hang out, they're going to the drive-ins. This is also when TV became a big staple in American homes, so they would see the reruns on TV. That is another kind of stream of media going towards them. So as movies came out and they noticed that there was a teen audience, they would try to foster to that, as well as kind of throwback to stuff that the teens would be watching as well. Also, the new teenage sensibility in films is going to be, we're starting to cater towards them. We had a little bit of teen culture kind of shown in the 60s, but these are gonna be more plot centric to their teen struggles and just trying to appeal to that audience by showing them. So with that, we go to Timothy Shea. What did he say? Teenagers of the late 70s had radically changed their priorities compared to their counterparts a decade earlier. Rather than protest, they sought polyester. So this is going to mark a shift in kind of the teen culture that we show. Whereas in the 60s, with Vietnam going on and the free love movement, with the just kind of that youth culture, you would see kind of there's emotion in there. There's strong emotion. And now we kind of move towards teens needing to find another kind of cultural signifier, and that kind of towards consumption and commercialism. So we'll see that reflected in the movies. Speaking of that, I will show you our lesson, and then we'll explain how that applies to these movies, or how they're shown. So what do we learn in the movies from the 70s? Generally, we enjoy that we learn that you should enjoy your childhood while you still can. This is kind of the first time that teens are going to see other teens, in the media growing up and, kind of making a big deal about it and being, the focus of the film. So it's kind of we need how to become adults in this new kind of world, and that's reflected in how, I think, in the actual, the audience in real life, they would be kind of scared to enter this kind of Cold War world where they grew up protesting, but now it's kind of a stalemate, and there's nothing really to identify with. There's nothing to really be against as a group. So let's get into the movies. First off, I want to talk about The Lords of Flatbush. So what is this movie? It's a biker-esque guys club. They all wear leather jackets. One of them is Sylvester Stallone, Sly, and then the other one, there's another Henry Winkler, the Fonz, and a couple other guys that were popular at the time. This is from 1974. So they were in this social club, and a couple of them were developing interesting girls, and they wanted to do that instead of do the club. That's the plot. So this is going to be the start of this. You'll see it a nostalgia for about 30 years prior. So this is in the 70s. So this is showing nostalgia for kind of culture in the 50s. You really see the connection to the Wild One of just a biker gang and then wanting to be different and different from society. But this also kind of shows teens just being teens and allowed to explore their interests and like girls and chase after them with no real social implications. Enjoy your childhood while you still can. They are not feeling rushed to move on. They're just kind of living. This is romanticizing a period where all the kids had to worry about was girls and gangs with no worry about the future. It's the pinnacle of live in the moment type of youth. The next movie I want to talk about from the 70s, 78, is Grease. You know it, you love it. It's Grease Lightning. This is again stacked with nostalgia for the 50s. So, the overall plot of, like, you know, the Sandy, Danny love thing, changing yourself for your partner and then not, whatever. That's kind of not what I want to talk about. That's, like, being true to yourself. What I want to talk about is Frenchie's plotline. You know my girl Frenchie. She had the pink hair. She was iconic for the time. In Glee, she was freaking Sugar Mata, iconic. So Frenchie's plotline, she drops out of high school to go to beauty school. She flunks out of beauty school, and then she, like, goes back to high school. This reinforces the narrative that has been exaggerated of, like, in the modern times of, like, go to school and then worry about the future. There's kind of the narrative of, like, go to college, get a degree, and then it doesn't matter what degree, like, what subject it's in, it's going to help you get a job in the future. And just kind of, like, send you on the right path of education. The subplot of Grease communicates that people can delay growing up and actively encourages it. She tries to grow up. She tries to get a job, to make a career for herself. And it's shown as something that she maybe shouldn't do, something she should hold off on. And then you see she has a conversation with the waitress at the diner who, like, convinces her to go back to school. And she's like, you don't want to be a waitress like me. Like, you don't want to be stuck in this same job, like, for the rest of your life. And Frenchie really sees that and then goes back to school, which, yeah, it probably will help her get a better job. But it just implies that she shouldn't have been thinking maybe about her future as much as she was. Enjoy your childhood while you still can. She sees the future as imminent, that she needs to do something. She decides beauty school, but she is, like, encouraged to just enjoy her childhood, go back to high school, be in the social clubs. All right. The next one is another musical, if you can call it that. Saturday Night Fever from 77. So you know this one. You know Staying Alive, all John Travolta struts down the sidewalk carrying a can of paint. It's beautiful. It's an aesthetic. You might not know the plot because really it's not the best plot, but Tony recently graduates high school. That's our man Danny Travolta, Danny Zuko, John Travolta. Two Travoltas. Not on purpose. So he graduated. He's searching for kind of his life's path. He discovers passion for dance, which his parents do not approve of. He falls in love with his dance partner eventually. That's basically it. He has some troubled friends. He is trying to get a girlfriend the whole time. His brother also at some point comes back to live with them at the house, kind of like he was a priest, and then he reveals to our man Tony that he no longer is, and he's just kind of like searching for a new path. He kind of like failed at going out. So this connects to Neil's idea about how Teen Pics in the beginning incorporated music into its narratives. This movie really pushed disco into the mainstream when originally disco was kind of really associated with on the fringes with like gay bars, and no one wanted to listen to disco. It wasn't seen as mainstream or popular. This is kind of still riding the wave of the end of like the British invasion of just like, what do we do next? So this was Saturday Night Fever brought with a big cultural teen movement of like dancing at the disco and then just the disco genre of music. The Bee Gees like were, I think, top 10 like Bee Gees. They pulled a Taylor Swift, if you will. And you know, I think Saturday Night Fever was the soundtrack was one of the most printed albums of all time. Can't find one thrifted, but I'm still working on it. Anyway, so this cultural movement as the plot also encouraged Tony to pursue his passions despite how unconventional they may be in the future. Tony's crisis of not knowing what to do coincides with his brother's crisis of not wanting to be a priest. So this communicates that the same doubts and worries Tony is having in his teen years do not go away as one enters adulthood. This is going to be a reoccurring theme that we see throughout the project, but this is kind of where we see it first represented. It's the first time we see kind of a child seeing someone else not happy with how their life turned out, and they're basically in the same position as each other of, oh, I need to kind of mature, learn something, grow up, move past this point in my life. I feel that you can bring in a point about his friend's death. They are all on drugs, and they are on a bridge. One of them decides to jump off. So that happens in the movie, and then there's also, I think, 2 depictions of like attempted rape on 2 different girls. I think Melanie and Stephanie. I could be mistaken. I think that's their names though. So this kind of touch on the fact that adult issues permeate into your kind of teen lives. You see these kind of like death and kind of sexual assault as something that maybe teens shouldn't have to deal with because they're still children living their lives, trying to like figure out where they fit in the world. But this kind of is an example of how the teens were still dealing with that and kind of having to grow up with this and just kind of take on these adult issues, which compounds the pressure these people are feeling regarding growing up. I'll fix that. But Tony tries to do as society tells him and think about his future, find like what he wants to do with his life, find a career, a passion, but he goes about it the wrong way of like dance and like the arts, seeing as his parents disapprove. And then other events like the suicide ensure that he can't enjoy his youth. He's having to deal with like these really big crises as he's trying to like grow up. Maybe he already is more grown up because of these. That'll be a thing. The last one I wanted to go into depth on is the movie Halloween. I mentioned it earlier. John Carpenter. It's the first like classic slasher. It is from 1978. So yeah, basically it's Halloween night. Serial killer escapes from prison. Kills some kids. Well, teens. That's the plot. So the audience that go and see horror since the 50s are teenagers. Studios know this. We saw this a little bit with I Was a Teenage Werewolf, but back then the like kind of universal wave was more towards like adults. But this is a whole shift towards, let's show teens in these situations. Only the innocent girl survives while the others die during the sexual act. You remember our man Bob, who she thinks is a ghost. I think that's very funny. He dresses up, but it is Mike Myers. This translates to society reinforcing the fact, through Mike Myers, that growing up and doing grown-up stuff is wrong and detrimental to teenagers' survival. They shouldn't be doing these grown-up things. They are teenagers, therefore they should die. It places a stigma around sex that discourages teens from wanting to do grown-up things like that, that would in turn allow them to grow up. So it kind of places a stigma around things that need to happen in order to grow up, so that like they would, because parents are going to tell their kids that like, don't have sex as a child, and then this kind of reinforces that narrative. But in order to grow up, you kind of, one of the signifiers, is having sex. So this is, as I said, the beginning of the slasher subgenre, genre bending that will continue. This has to do, I think, with horror's connection to kind of society and how it at its core, horror as a genre kind of depicts what is a threat to an established society. So in a lot of cases, it is going to be the revolutionary youth culture that is like set to change the standard. you would see this a lot in the 70s just because, or 60s, 70s, because there was the big youth movement and protest against the Vietnam War that was associated with the youth movement, but also like the Summer of Love. My honorable mentions. First up, I have The Last Picture Show from 1971. So this is one of those, like, again, nostalgic for the 50s. It's about, you know, the drive-in getting closed, and there's kind of small town America, and then showing like conflict and like hidden stuff like that they don't want you to see with their projected image of the nuclear family, stuff like that. This was Jeff Bridges. It's just coming of age, like, relevant because it is, as I said, the nostalgia factor. The next one is American Graffiti. Again, this is an early George Lucas. It's just the kids driving, listening to the radio, going to the diner, that kind of nostalgic feel that Lords of Flatbush had, but with less plot, I would argue. Third one is Carrie from 1976, you know, the Stephen King adaptation. It's good. It's in the same line as Halloween, but this time it shows the teen as kind of something to be feared, something fighting against the established order, but it also depicts the effects that parents have and maybe the responsibility they should have when dealing with children, and just kind of like how adults should have a hand in raising them to know how to fit into society to a certain point. The last one is Rock and Roll High School. It is a parody. That's kind of the first like parody we see of, you know, the movies from like the 50s where it was just like girls going crazy for the rock stars. Like, I assume an Elvis movie. I haven't seen an Elvis movie. It's the Ramones soundtrack. It's just kind of, we got all the stereotypes. We've got the nerd, the like the groupie cheerleader, stuff like that. It's got a good soundtrack, so that it also continues the trend of associating rock with like teen culture, and just kind of depicting that in the movies too. So to conclude here with the genres, I will also just add, I will officially add the horror genre, even though we've had it. It is the first time we're kind of catering towards kids. And then melodrama is more of a subgenre within the teen culture, or the teen coming of age genre, of just with like Saturday Night Fever and just Grease, and focusing on the relationship between the two teens and just kind of them as people. I'll see you in the 80s. Hello, it is the 80s, if you couldn't tell. Now, once again, I'm going to start off looking at what our theorists say. So, I want to start this segment off by saying that the world according to Teen Pix is centered around comparing the 80s to the 50s. So, his thesis, Leach's thesis, basically is that the Hughes movies, John Hughes, you know, Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink, that sort of deal, the Brat Pack. Hughes movies move generally critical toward the whole ideal of adulthood. Now, there are a couple bullet points, so bear with me. Adults represent a hypocritical, alienating, and meaningless system. In these movies, and typical of just coming-of-age movies in the 80s generally, is going to be a demonization of the parents and adults system in place, and it's just going to focus on the teens kind of trying to solve their own problems and work within the system that they can. And that's just a general trend. These movies valorize adolescence as an unchanging, self-justifying system of values which does not reaffirm or renew standards of maturity, but simply marginalizes the adult world by ignoring any possible continuities it might have with the world of adolescence. So, that's a block of text. What does that mean? it just emphasizes that the teens are working within the teen world. They're not stepping into further adolescence. They're not stepping into adulthood. They are living in their own kind of world of adolescence, and anyone outside of that is kind of a threat to your stable ecosystem that you've established, that you're living within, that kind of defines your life. Another point is that another quote is, the teens don't need to grow up because they're doing fine as teens. In these movies, the teens are generally depicted as adults, like specifically John Hughes. They're generally self-sufficient. They're living on their own. I'm thinking specifically Pretty in Pink in this one, but like 16 Candles, her whole deal is that she is kind of having to be independent on her own. They're doing fine this way. Why should they have to change? The next quote I had is that they deal with worrying of growing up by denying it, reassuring the audience it will never happen to them. At the same time, they valorize adolescent values by arranging their triumph over the discredited adult values they oppose. This is again just, it's emphasizing that teens tend to only interact with teens. They tend to only support teens, and by like showing to the audience that they can overcome these issues by themselves, they don't really need to grow up. Going back to the other point, that their values that they push are inherently better or like more justified than the adults' values in their lives, because why would they need these adult values if theirs are working fine? And this kind of counter what the adults are saying. Hughes essentially others the adult values. He places them as in opposition to what the teens want, and he places the adults in the way of the teens. So really, that's what Leach has to say about Hughes movies in the 80s. That's what's relevant here, is basically teens tend to, in the 80s, just believe that they're already grown up. Kind of working with that is what Shea has to say. American youth in the 1980s were indeed desperate to experiment with sex and drugs and to be lulled into expressing their politics through consumption. This is a further trend of the teens trying to find their own identity. They need to distance themselves from the previous generations, like signifying identifiers, and they're moving into the Reagan era, the Cold War, where consumption is still pretty high. It's encouraged to support the economy, and you're really getting exposed to just more stuff. So, what do we learn? Essentially, that independence is the key to survival. I think you can see the jump I made here. I'll further explain it with the movies. But essentially, because the teens must function as adults in their teenhood, they are already independent, and that must persist. So with all this said, I just wanted to give some more background on just kind of the 80s in general. So this was part of the time of the oversaturation of the kind of teen market, the coming of age market. Movies overwhelmingly were directed at teenagers or families. This is kind of when the film school directors, so that's like George Lucas, Spielberg, that kind of generation, that's when they started creating movies, and they were the first ones to make movies for kind of the family audience. They're you see your Indiana Jones, you see Star Wars and stuff that is just made, that can be consumed by your kids and your adults alike. They can go together. It can be a family event, whereas before it was mostly for adults or for children. This appeals to the broader audience. Now these films are also for, as Leach would say, present and former adolescents. As before in the 50s, they were more made for present and future adults. Now we have strictly shifted our focus on the teen being the main event, the main draw, the main conflict, and then the parents kind of taking a secondary role of only really being antagonistic. Leach said that the problem for Hughes's teens is not merely that particular adults offer inadequate role models. The whole system they represent is so hypocritical, alienating, and meaningless that growing up would mean the end of the world. It's frustration, really, with the adults in their lives, and just kind of living in a constant crisis, I think, is part of it. This is the Cold War. And it's just not being able to perceive that a world after yours kind of exists that you would want to be a part of, because these adults are just kind of not appealing. Financial uneasiness and the helplessness of the Reagan era during this time is also where I would want to bring in one of our TV shows. It's our first TV show that I'm mentioning, 21 Jump Street. Not the Channing Tatum movie. I'm talking about the Johnny Depp TV show, which ran from 1987 to 1991. Really, it's your propaganda show. It's, the premise. It's cops going undercover into like high schools and just kind of dealing with teen issues. There's a lot of drug addiction. There's a lot of crime, gang violence, and this is kind of just indicative of the times that these teens are living in, where everything is such a big deal, and it's teens having to deal with stuff for the first time. So of course it's going to be big. So let's get into the movies. The first one we'll mention here is, I'll line it up with Halloween, Friday the 13th. In the slasher film's heyday, it is now the thing. It's the most probably popular horror film from this decade. Again, they're punishing the sexually active and the drug users. It's a punishment for a previous group of kids accident, which was like letting a kid drown. You know the plot of Friday the 13th. It's a summer camp. The counselors are getting killed. They're doing discretions. It's really the previous group of counselors were messing around and they let this kid drown. And now that kid's mom is kind of killing them all. Spoilers for a movie that came out in 1980, I guess. So this group of kids' accidents, it wasn't something that they could easily prevent, because essentially it wasn't their fault. They are getting punished for a previous generation's actions. Sound familiar? So by this framing of the narrative, through that, the movie doesn't necessarily place blame on the current teenager, but it still punishes them. This communicates it's a pressure on teenagers that they need to be better than the generations previous. Why are they getting punished for something that they didn't do? It's a general frustration with how their teenagers are being treated within society. I like to also bring in War Games, which is a Matthew Broderick movie from the 80s. It mentioned in Ready Player One, so I don't know if that's where I heard of it. I don't know, that's where you guys might know it from. But essentially Matthew Broderick he's a computer geek. He's like hacking a different computer because he wants to buy like a video game. But he accidentally hacks into the big government computer that was like tracking the Cold War with Russia and like the nukes being launched. So this generation came of age during the Cold War. They're constantly facing the threat of nuclear war and stuff they can't control from the older generation. So I think this is it's indicative of their desire for control and their lack of control with the world around them. It also, Friday the 13th also supports Leach's thesis, because these were teens built generally fine as they were, but an outside force, an adult I might add, incites the film's conflict, meaning the other kid's mother. A movie that is indicative of this is Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Another Matthew Broderick, similar. I guess I like talking about it. What can I say? So Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Matthew Broderick and Cameron, his friend, they skip school with Ferris's girlfriend Sloane. They just kind of go around Chicago, have a good time. Cameron has a little crisis. We learn about ourselves. Yay. So this brings something different to the table than some of these other movies, though. Ferris is perfectly content with his life. He enjoys skipping school. He enjoys hanging out with Sloane and Cameron. But I would argue that Ferris isn't really the true protagonist of this movie, despite the name being Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Hear me out. I think Cameron is the main character. He's the one that undergoes a change throughout the movie. But the development he faces is from worrying about his future and his parents to kind of adopting Ferris's way of thinking. In a way, this shows the effects of the 70s narrative regarding enjoying your teen years. Cameron learns the lesson not through adults enforcing it, but through Ferris and Sloane, who've already learned it. Cameron is under the impression that he needs to, like, his life will kind of be over if he steps on a line, messes up, doesn't get into college. He's so worried about the car that he can barely enjoy their day in New York until he has this little epiphany that, like, life can be more than that, and, like, just perspective shifts, really. I'm not gonna get into Ferris Bueller. Yeah, I think Cameron learning that they can be self-sufficient, they can be independent, this can be fun, they can enjoy life as they are, and instead of worrying about the future, is again in line with our independence is the key to survival. Why do I have to change? I'm fine as I am. They also deal with the worry of growing up by denying it, reassuring the audience that it will happen at the same time as they valorize adolescent values. So that was a quote from Leach again. I said it earlier. Yeah, they really show that they don't need to grow up, and they show the audience how much they can kind of enjoy, how much life they are living by being teens. They face no repercussions also, while Jeannie, Ferris's sister, does, only because she is representative of the values of the other adults in the movie. Jeannie is the one, she's the Candace from Phineas and Ferb. She's trying to get Ferris in trouble, and for that she is punished by their parents. And essentially, well, while she does pull through at the end, it's after she had an interaction with Charlie Sheen, and after she kind of let go of her preoccupations of getting Ferris in trouble. So really all of these 80s narratives valorize the adolescent perspective by restricting adults to one of two roles, either ineffectual figures incapable of protecting their children, or threatening figures to be avoided or destroyed. This is gonna be a recurring theme in a lot of teen media, but if adults are showed in these movies or shows that are centric on children, the adults are either gonna be like actively working against what our protagonists are trying to do, stopping them from going to the dance, stopping the party from happening, or they're gonna be ineffectual. They're just gonna be there. They're not gonna really be capable of helping our protagonists. They're not gonna be stopping our protagonists per se, but that's not always the best thing. They're just not gonna be able to help the situation. I think like a movie that kind of exemplifies this to its basics is Breakfast Club, where you have they're listing their incapable parents, their parents that did not help them, that failed them. The princess, she learned like the most useless party trick. Our man Bender got like a pack of cigarettes for Christmas. Our jock is, nervous breakdown, I think. In addition to the overbearing teacher, who would be the other end of the spectrum, who's threatening them, he's like trying to keep them in line. So these are both just not the best for the kids. This is a good time to put up the Breakfast Club. Do I even need to explain that to you? In addition to what I just said about it, the Breakfast Club is just
teens going to detention, then they're trying to have fun. They learn about themselves, they learn about each other. It's about like not stereotyping, but it's also like, hey, we found a community here and we are comfortable in this. And then it frames, the adults as just kind of being against them. I think you see that really in the beginning part where the teacher is still like explaining the rules to them, and he keeps on giving, I think it's Bender, just detention upon detention for really doing nothing or trying to defend himself. And it shows that the teens are trying to work within the system that they can. They're trying to speak up for themselves, but just getting torn down by the authority figures, the adults in their lives. The last film I have in the main four, Fast Times at Ridgemont High. It's another kind of parody-esque movie. It's just the classic, teens graduating, just slice of life kind of deal. You have all the stereotypes, the stoner, the bookworm, the XYZ. It's classic, but it's also it's a product of its time. So I just wanted to add one more TV show. I have The Wonder Years. It's the classic slice of life show. It ran from 1988 to 1993. So I'll put it up here. It's one my mom watched, so it was kind of the family show. It's just, kid going through life trying to figure it out, narrated by his adult self. This is kind of the TV format that will dominate at least family TV up until around, I'd say, late 2000s, 2010s-ish, when, streaming took over and changed kind of the audience that you could reach, your scope, and just kind of who you what the trends are. So Wonder Years, it's your family show. It's your, mom and dad conflict, your kids conflict that go through life. It's nothing special, but it is indicative of the times. I've said that a lot. I do have a couple honorable mentions. The first one is War Games, which is the Matthew Broderick movie I described earlier. It's a lot of fun. It's one of the early geek ones. It's another indicative. It represents another subculture that the kind of teens were getting into, of the computers and just kind of modernized technology. I have Heathers up here. It's another kind of youth counterculture, but it's kind of the dark side. It deals with teen suicide, which was a hot topic issue at the time. And it's Winona Ryder and Christian Slater, who were popular actors at the time for teens, so I had to bring them in here. And then I also have Nightmare on Elm Street, which is another Johnny Depp. It's another horror. It's just, again, being kind of punished for existing within society, where Freddy Krueger is killing them because they are kids, and just that was his deal, and he's haunting them because he can, and there's nothing they can really do about it except, well, I think they do defeat him at the end, but yeah, the 80s is really just about trying to find your own independence and live within the system that you can, despite frustration towards that system. It is the 90s. Hello. It is all that in a bag of chips. It is amazing here in the 90s. I don't know any other slang. So, where do we want to start in the 90s? I think we should start with... I get to decide, so it doesn't matter what you think. I think we're going to start with, what lesson do we learn? We're going to learn don't grow up too quickly, or perpetual adolescence. There's this notion of, I'm fine as a child. I've already done all I need to, and I can continue to exist as I am. I think the first point to this is going to be scholars I'm citing. So, we're not going to see very much of Mr. Thomas Leach anymore, because his book did just cover from the 50s to the 80s. But thank goodness Timothy Shea does cover more than that. So the quote for this decade that I chose is, "This film fresh from 1994." So that is when it's like a child drug dealer, sister gets addicted to drugs, gang drama. And then he joins like a chess championship and to like get them out of there. So this film calls attention to at least two crucial factors in the representation of troubled urban youth. Their strength lies in their insight and compassion, and youth need to realize this at strikingly younger ages. So what this is saying, insight and compassion, you need to improve these skills at a younger age, thus you need to grow up quicker. I think this makes you kind of feel more mature than maybe others would have earlier. And this is just kind of connecting back to like, oh, I'm already grown up. I already did this maturing. I'm fine at the state where I am. And you kind of just remain at that for a longer period of time, so you don't feel the need to grow up as eminent as maybe earlier generations did. This brings us to the movies that I'm going to talk about specifically for the 90s. The first one is Encino Man. I'm not sure how popular this was during the 90s, but I watched it. It's pretty fun. You should too. I don't know. So two teenagers. One is Samwise Gamgee. The other is a stoner named Stoney. Dig up a caveman who happens to be Brendan Fraser. That's the reason to watch it. I'll give you that. They name him Link because he's the missing link. Haha. And they pass him off as like the foreign exchange student. Hilarity ensues. I think this is pretty funny because they like gaslight his parents into being like, yeah, you don't remember agreeing to take on a foreign exchange student? What? But it's pretty amusing. It's fun. So what is further detail, please? This is literally about a person frozen in his teenhood. Link faces no obstacles once he understands what's going on. Once he understands kind of what school is, how he should act during school, he understands very quickly how to make friends, and people flock to him. He becomes the popular person. He's fine as he is. He doesn't need to even really develop further than a caveman did. Because those caveman skills are getting him far in life as he measures it. Stoney also seems very content with his life the way it is. He's not the one looking for change. Dave is the one who's like, we need to get popular. He's concerned with getting the girl and getting popular, but Stoney's like, hey man, I think we're fine. We can just hang out. A quote from Neil is coming up. It's, teenagers are on their own, responsible only to themselves because their parents have let them down. This is it's kind of a continuation of our narrative from the 80s of just teens need to kind of mature faster. They need to take on these responsibilities. This applies to Dave and Stoney, who must essentially parent Link. I think their dynamic is very similar to Rebel Without a Cause when James Dean and I think it's Natalie Wood, the girl, when they have to parent Plato, the kid, or I think there's like fellow teenager. They like act as his parents near the end of the film, and they have a similar dynamic of just like showing him how to act, like kind of making up for what their parents are lacking in their lives. Because you also learn that Stoney's parents are kind of like absent, and that's why he's also always hanging out with Dave's house. I'd also like to connect this to one of Leach's earlier points about the later teen movies kind of having an external force being the obstacle as opposed to an internal one in the earlier ones. Because, like, again, Rebel Without a Cause, the obstacle was, like, overcoming what their parents failed them in. But here, the obstacle is, like, romance and, like, they don't think I'm cool, and like the problem is everyone else not understanding that how cool of a person he is, as opposed to like him not being okay. In the end, Dave achieves what he set out to and resolves the issues without needing to grow or mature. Everyone just realized that he was cool and he became popular. So yeah, he was fine as he was. Another movie is Clueless. This is a masterpiece. So it's Emma by Jane Austen, but adapted for a modern audience. It's the 90s. They're in like a kind of rich preppy school. It's very much Cher, that's her girl Emma. She is kind of just meddling in everyone's life. She's like setting people up. She's just imposing what she thinks on other people and just kind of doing a lot of that meddling. So at one point, what I want to mention is she gets her driver's license. So she doesn't really understand the responsibility of being able to drive on the road legally. There's this joke that like 2 learner permits don't equal 1 license from her dad about going out with Cher. She like is driving on the sidewalk. She has a ticket and she doesn't understand like that she needs to do anything about that. She tries to like kind of weasel her way and charm her way into having a license with the instructor once he was like, "Hey, lady, pull over." This kind of contributes to this era of fake maturity, which I think is again exemplified in a scene where she's watching TV and it's MTV and Josh is like, "Hey, don't you want to watch the news?" And she's like, "I'll watch the news," even though she doesn't really see the point to it, but she's like trying to come across like she does because Josh is cooler than her, as she perceives. So in all these instances, she views herself as grown up, so she doesn't really need to mature past that. Another point to Cher's kind of character is that she has the need to kind of like control everything around her. You see this when she's making over Ty. She kind of views her as like her pet project, needing to be improved to her standards. You see this in taking care of her dad. She like makes her his lunches and everything. Meddling in her teacher's love life. She like sets up the English teacher with like the speech teacher. She just wants to control her environment. I think this connects back to her lack of control of her actual life, because it's heavily implied that her dad is like kind of putting her on a path and she just kind of doesn't have a say in that. So I think this is kind of her acting out against that. The next movie I want to talk about is 10 Things I Hate About You. 10 Things I Hate About You is Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew, adapted for a modern audience. Sounds kind of similar. So it's kind of it's a fun little plot. Jess Gordon-Levitt's character is Cameron. He falls in love with Bianca, wants to ask her out, but Bianca can't go out with someone until her sister Kat is going out with someone. So Cameron and Bernard from the Santa Claus, they go up to Joey and they're like, "Hey, don't you want to go out with Bianca?" And he's like, "I do." And they're like, "Here, you can pay this guy to go out. You pay this guy Patrick, who is Heath Ledger, to go out with Kat, and Bianca." And Joey's like, "Okay, good idea, so he tells Kat." But Cameron's like, when he's like working the Bianca angle, tutoring her in French, being like, "Hey, if I get someone to go out with Kat, will you go out with me?" So it's like this whole, it's a shape for these relationships, that's for sure. But what I want to focus on is Kat and Bianca's relationship. So there's a point where you see there's a lot of conflict between them because Kat doesn't want to date. She's kind of the girl boss. She's like a biatch, self-proclaimed, that is. And this kind of is in direct opposition to how Bianca presents herself as kind of like the girly girl, the ditz. She does care about, she's like knowledgeable about fashion and she like knows French, but she kind of veils herself. She's like Lydia from Teen Wolf, basically. So they're kind of clashing because Bianca really wants to date boys. And it comes out that Kat used to go out with Joey and he kind of pressured her into having sex. This is why she doesn't want Bianca to go out with Joey. She wanted Bianca to make her own decision about Joey, which was, they like kind of hit it off at the party and then Cameron kind of gave up. I think these connect to the moral of don't rush it. Bianca kind of realizes that Joey is kind of a butt, and they like break up at prom. They kind of realize that like they can enjoy these like teenage moments. Bianca goes with the much more innocent Cameron. Kat ends up with Patrick. Patrick is once you get over his like, you know, reputation, he is shown as like a gentle person who like is generally harmless. So these girls do end up with like the nice guy at the end, and they can just like enjoy their kind of teenage relationships while they can. I also want to point out that there has been a shift towards female protagonists. It's interesting given that we then have the male love interest who have much more depth than, like, say, their predecessors, even their contemporaries. In Encino Man, the girl kind of just exists as someone to be won and, like, something to lust after, and, like, Sloane and Ferris Bueller doesn't really have that much of a personality beyond being in love with Ferris and stuff like that. Moving on to My Own Private Idaho. First thing I want to say about this movie, is it a coming-of-age movie? I believe it is. At its core, what is a coming-of-age movie if not a journey towards self-discovery, self-identity? And that sure is what Mike goes through on this journey. So what is the plot of My Own Private Idaho? I would really recommend this movie. 1991, Gus Van Sant. It's Keanu Reeves, River Phoenix. Keanu plays a character named Scotty. He is the son of the mayor, very wealthy. He's kind of slumming it with these male prostitutes and kind of, I think, drug dealers. They do drugs. Mike has a coke addiction, I think. He's just kind of slumming it with them and just kind of living his life until he has to until he turns 21 and he has to go and work for his dad as, like, in the mayor's office. The other character, so that's like Shakespeare's, it's King Richard or King Henry, one of them. I don't remember. The other main character is Mike, that is River Phoenix. He has narcolepsy. He has no money to his name. He's just kind of living with these other vagrants, living his life. I think it's in Portland. That's the urban setting. So the relevant part here is Mike's search for his mother. They kind of just like have an opportunity to do something and they're like, oh, where should we go? And Mike's like, oh, I have a brother. Let's go visit him. His brother is in Idaho. That's why, like, it's My Own Private Idaho. That's where Mike grew up. His mother, you had to give him up to an institution, I think, because she was unfit. It's heavily implied that. I don't think it's explicit. All this to say, they go to his brother's house. We learn that his brother is actually his father. Bum, bum, bum. This kind of shakes his world. Mike's world. This, like, instability, I think, is indicative of his search for identity. It's what sets him off on this journey even more. This journey for his mother, because, like, everything he knew about his previous self is no longer, and he never really got to know his mother beyond these, like, vague flashes. Speaking of these vague flashes, they happen when he has a narcoleptic episode. It is flashes of his childhood home. This lets us know, A, what Mike wants. He wants this kind of old-fashioned stability. He wants this good old American sentiments with his mother and maybe his father-brother. It also lets us know, B, what Mike thinks of as home. It is a family. It is people who kind of have fun together, hang out, take care of each other. It's kind of similar, I think you could say, to the community he finds with the vagrants, but he doesn't really find any real connection to anyone but Scotty, who does not last, because Mike and Scott get separated once Mike falls in love with someone in Italy, because they went there because Scott falls in love with someone from Italy because they go there because Mike's mom used to live there. She no longer does, and in the end they don't even find his mother at the end. They go back to Portland. Mike goes off and works for his dad. Scotty does that. Scotty goes off and works for his dad. Mike continues to be a prostitute on the street. Yada yada yada. He ends up Mike back in Idaho. He is on the street. He calls home. He remembers the street. He recognizes the street. Unfortunately, he falls asleep. He has a narcoleptic episode, but thank goodness who comes to save him? I would propose his brother, because this is the same truck we see earlier at his home. his brother picks him up and brings him back home. This is a connection to the theme of family and kind of like a lost family, finding a stability in that family, and like his brother kind of essentially replaces Mike, the only person he's kind of showed love for, in being this sense of stability. But how does this tie back into my theme of don't grow up too quickly, perpetual adolescence? This isn't a complete journey. In the end, they don't find his mother. He doesn't learn anything about himself. All he does is get abandoned, and then by his best friend. He's still going through this journey, and it shows how non-easily resolved these issues are. That being said, let's talk about my honorable mentions. My first one is, drumroll, American Pie from 1999. This is kind of part of the bigger trend of like teenage guys, let's have fun, it's the big party movies. It's just guys trying to lose their virginity. That's the plot. It's fun. It spawned a lot of spin-offs, which is kind of like why I included it here, because it is kind of representative of a subculture, of a subgenre of just like party movies. The next one I included here is Scream from 96. It's kind of one of the only relevant like teen horror movies. I think we had a burnout in the 80s with the big trend that came with Friday the 13th. And I'd like to point out that it is also a kind of a parody of horror movies previous to a certain extent, like given the character that I always think is Scott Evil but isn't, who's like, hey, never say I'll be right back, and that guy who like doesn't get murdered because he doesn't believe it's the ghost, or doesn't see the ghost. The last movie I included over here is Boys in the Hood. This is from 1991. It is part of another separate subgenre where that focused kind of like on urban black youth, which was a big movement in the 90s. They kind of just were representing this subculture where these teens were getting into gangs, they were getting into drugs, they were homeless, they were just dealing with all these drama. This connects back to, of course, Fresh. The only other thing I can add for the 90s are the TV shows. We are near the end of the network era, I believe. So we have a lot of TV shows, especially with MTV rising in popularity. First, I'd like to talk about That 70s Show. So this is one that I believe was on MTV. It's another one of those gaps where it's like nostalgia for the 70s and the 90s. It's very nostalgic for this era. I think, though, if you look at our theme of perpetual adolescence, you'll find that very troubling when you look at what happens after they graduate high school. So all the characters kind of essentially refuse to grow up and leave for college. Donna is the only one who leaves, but it's after like an argument with Eric about how he doesn't want her to. Eric has to stay behind to take care of his family. Ashton Kutcher, Kelso, he like gets a girl pregnant. He doesn't go to college. He's not smart. I love Kelso, but no. And then Hyde, I believe this is when he's working at the photo hut and just kind of sleeping there, and he doesn't go to college either. Nothing happens after high school. They stay stuck in the same routine, except instead of school, it's work, and then it's hanging out, smoking weed. So these characters, after they graduate, they're stuck in this same mind-numbing perpetual suburbia that they promised themselves they would get out of. Eric and Donna especially have many discussions of just like, I do not want to end up with like my parents stuck in Point Place, Wisconsin. And just kind of seeing them putter out and be stuck in this adolescent state where they don't see any way to continue on past their teenage routines is just kind of emblematic of the time of our theme here. The other one I would like to bring in is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So it's a genre one. It's horror. if you couldn't tell. Joss Whedon, one of his earlier ones, that's kind of what got him popular. So this is a show that follows a teenager grappling with social and school life, and with her, like, balancing that with her adult job of slaying vampires. But it is a job that, like, takes time, responsibility. She has to, like, protect the world, basically. And this reverts back to the why grow up I already am kind of theme. There's an episode of the show where Buffy and everyone have to take a test to kind of, like, see what their career should be. And Buffy is very resistant to take this test. She does not want to. She kind of has this mindset of, I'm not even going to get to that point where I need to grow up because I'm going to die. Slayers die young. So she kind of has this perpetual adolescence mindset to her life. They also push this kind of, like, childhood mentality a lot. I think a point of that is Band Candy, the episode. I think it's season 2, where you remember, like, how in school when you would have that fundraiser where you'd have to sell candy bars. Here they do that, but they're made by the bad guy, and the candy bars make all the adults' minds revert back to their teenage selves. So we see, like, a fun little romance between Giles and Buffy's mom, Joyce. Not Joyce. Whatever. Shout out Giles. I love that outfit on that man. But that's just kind of another point of just adolescence is fun. You don't need to grow up. Or, like, growing up is kind of boring. Although the lesson that Buffy does learn in that episode is she needs to take more responsibility because she does wreck the car. But also look at how the show fell apart when the group went to college. Again, like every other teenage show, these do graduate, they do go off to college, and it does get worse. If you look at how Willow got addicted to drugs, it's magic in the show, but, like, it's a lazy metaphor for drugs. It's a drug addiction. It's very heavy-handed. She falls into this because of, I believe, Tara's death. I love Willow. I love Tara. I didn't love this arc. And it's something that happened because of the people she met when she went to college, when in the act of, like, kind of the next step of growing up. So you could kind of trace it back to that. Also, if you look at what Xander did after high school, he just went on a road trip, came back, and he, like, worked on a construction site. He got syphilis, which she mentions a lot, so I feel like I have to shout out Xander. But, like, his life isn't that good. He's questioning his future with Anya. He's unsure of, like, that relationship. He doesn't know what to do. He's still living in his mother's basement. So, like, the only character that kind of show getting out of this adolescent mindset, it does not end well for him. All of this to say, in the 90s, there is this narrative of children having to grow up sooner. They're having these assigning they are, like, taking these responsibilities on, and then as they grow up, they kind of stay in this state of, oh, I'm, like, grown up for a child, and, like, I can, as a teenager, I can continue this on, and then they don't feel the need to move past teenagerhood, which is interesting. See you in the Welcome to the 2000s. It's my crib. I think that was the thousands. I think that's MTV. I don't really know. Anyway, the 2000s is an interesting year in the terms of coming of age movies. It's kind of the outlier, and I've kind of viewed it as that for multiple reasons. The first reason is going to be, what lesson do we learn? Overall, I believe these movies give us the lesson that adolescence is something to overcome. Now, in the past, we've seen this general theme of teens just having fun, enjoying their childhood, wanting it to continue on forever. And here is something where we kind of get the opposite of that, where we have them experience their adolescence, wish for more, and get something to look forward to. That's kind of my prelude to these movies. So the first one we are going to look at is The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants from 2005. So, if you don't know, this movie is... I want it to be in the way. This movie is about this group of girls. I believe there's 5 of them. And they all are best friends, but it's, a summer, and they all have to go, they're all going to different places. Like, one of them goes to visit her family in Greece, another goes to soccer camp, one has to stay home and hangs out with, like, this kid with cancer. I don't remember what America Ferrera does. She does something. But, they're, like, don't want to be disconnected, so they all go to the thrift store and they find this pair of pants that, like, all fits them, which is weird because they're different body types, but oh well, they're a pair of pants. So over the summer, they, like, each ship them off to each other with, little personalizations that, like, represent something that happened to them, and they're all, staying connected, and it's a lot of fun. So the whole thing that kickstarted the plot, Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, was the girls not wanting to be apart despite growing up. They were exploring their different interests, but they didn't want to. They wanted to hold on to, like, the last shred of their, like, childhood, which is being their friend group. They do not overcome this, like, needing to be apart but wanting to be together. But then the same thing happens in the sequel, implying that they still need this thread from their adolescence keeping them together. In the sequel, the same thing essentially happens. They, do their own thing. They ship the pants between them. I think it's a good message to say that you can keep your same friends into your future endeavors. It's letting the girls grow up, but still acknowledging that they can keep part of themselves that they like. Something that they need to just, like, overcome and not necessarily gripe with, I believe. So the next one I wanted to talk about is The Princess Diaries. With Anne Hathaway, where she's Mia Thermopolis of Princess of Genovia. So the plot of this movie, Anne Hathaway is living with her mom. They're, just like this American family. Her mom is, like, an artist, and she's, like, going to school. She finds out that her dad, who just died, was, like, the prince of Genovia, a fictional country that her, like, that her grandma is queen of right now. So her grandma comes and tells her, you need to be the next queen of Genovia. So you need to, like, come back and go to princess school. And Mia's like, I don't know about that. But she, goes through the transformation. She makes a couple missteps, rejects it, and then finally decides to take the title. So it's no coincidence that this takes place while Mia is a teenager. Her not wanting to take the crown is equal to, like, not wanting the responsibility like the grown-ups have. Like, being the throne is a grown-up job. It is a full-time job. It is essentially the most important grown-up in Genovia. And her kind of rejecting this call to it is similar to her kind of not wanting to grow up, to give up her innocence, to move on to the next stage of her life. Although she is 16, so this is just princess school, but in the long run. This also deviates from the larger trend that we've seen, because she embraces her new job, and in the sequel we see Mia keep in touch with her personal self. She doesn't have to give up her previous self in order to grow up, to become more independent, to learn things about herself and the way she fits into society. The next movie is a little on the younger side, but I believe it has a place here. Is Sleepover from 2004. So this is girls graduating 8th grade and going into freshman year of high school. That's the first year, 9th grade, if you're British for some reason. There's, like, 2 rival groups of girls. They each have a sleepover the same night, and they do, like, the same kind of tasks to see who gets the good lunch table in high school and who gets the crappy lunch table that's right next to the garbage can. Our girls that we follow are a part of the non-popular group. They are friends with Evan Peters. We love him. So this represents an outlier in that the girls embrace growing up, as the main girl gets the older guy. They're 8th graders going into freshman year, and the guy is already in high school. He might be like a sophomore or a junior at this point. They are not really scared. They're excited. They are ecstatic at the opportunity to go to high school to join this new environment with older guys, I guess. But they're still not afraid of it. There are themes of doing stuff that older women do. They go to the nightclub scene, where one of the tasks is to like go set up a online dating profile and go on one of the dates, and it happens to be a match with one of their teachers, and they meet at the nightclub, and she gets like a virgin drink, and he's like, "Huh? Are you one of my students?" And she's like, It's quite amusing. But nothing comes of that, more than a joke. She also, there's a scene where she like sneaks into the guy's bathroom while he's taking a shower to steal his underwear. That was one of the part of the game. But that's like something, you know, that you would see in a teen movie and like with other teens doing. This moral leans more towards it's okay to be yourself, but so does maturing as you realize better than where you fit into the social order. The moral, it's okay to be yourself, is really a positive one, obviously, just into a teen audience, but also makes it okay to kind of, to grow up, to be excited for this new stage, to figure out where your new life is going to be. Like Evan Peters, I believe, starts a new relationship with new girls, and it's okay to evolve into a new person, really. The last movie I'm going to go into depth on is 13 Going on 30 from 2004 with my man Mark Ruffalo, the Hulk. It's also got like Jennifer Gardner, but like they do the thriller dance. That's why you watch it. The reason I bring 13 Going on 30 into this, first I'll tell you the plot of it. It's a lot of fun. So this girl, Jennifer Gardner, is having her 13th birthday, and then she like invites a bunch of girls over. She gets bullied because she's like a nerd outcast. Young Mark Ruffalo, like not him, but the young version of himself, you know, is there, and it likes her, but like she kicks him out because he's nerdy. And then like magic wishing dust is what he sprinkles on the self-made Barbie dream house that he gets her. It falls on her. She's like, I want to be 30, flirty, and thriving. Or something. That's a phrase from the movie. So she wakes up, she's 30. She's like thrust into this life where she's a newspaper or a magazine editor. She has to come up with like new ideas to go on the magazine. Yada yada yada. She gets Mark Ruffalo to photograph one of her photo shoots that's like inspired by a yearbook aesthetic for the magazine. It's like a throwback. She realizes she should go back to being a teen, and then she does. So really, we see the same deviation from this structure of wanting to hold on to your teenhood in the 30 flirty and thriving, in that she doesn't exactly hate her life, but she doesn't want to experience it yet. She wants to have a say in how she ends up there. It's overall, I'd say, portrayed as a good thing, although she learns not to grow up too quickly. So it's kind of like the opposite of 10 Things I Hate About You, because she sees a potential future that she doesn't mind, wherein, as in 10 Things I Hate About You, it portrays kind of growing up as something scary, where like bad things can happen, but they might not necessarily happen, because Kat is excited to go to college. But this is a more concrete, I'd say, message of, hey, the future is pretty cool. It has to do with learning how overrated the school hierarchy is as well. A part of growing up is learning to kind of reject that kind of social structure, and this kind of reinforces that message. Make sense? All right. Moving on to my honorable mentions for the 2000s. The first one I have on there is Donnie Darko from 2001. You probably know it as an early Jake Gyllenhaal flick. It's one where film bros like to be like, whoa, what does it even really mean? It's fine. As far as I remember, there's like a evil bunny. But it's a mark of high art being infused into our even teen media. It's supposed to be kind of this prestigious, oh my gosh, you have to think hard about it, into this kind of media, this genre that's been largely trash. I mean, these, not a lot of these are hailed as like cinematic masterpieces, if you catch my drift. But this, it's kind of grown into such a genre that you can have high art, low art, and middle art as like subgenres, and just use the coming of age narrative to tell a story within these different genres. The next one I have is Mean Girls. That is a quintessential coming of age movie for this generation. If I had to explain the plot of Mean Girls to you, I don't know you, so just watch the movie. It reinforces Mean Girl stereotypes, obviously. We have gay stereotypes. We have just drama, and then it's a comedy, and it's like girls being bitchy, which is kind of the inverse of the American Pie movement. Because with Mean Girls, I think you also get, that was kind of a part of the Clueless wave with 10 Things I Hate About You, and She's the Man I'd put in there. Heathers, maybe, but that's a little early. And then the last one I have for here is Not Another Teen Movie from 2001. It is the quintessential parody of the teen movie. Chris Evans is in there. But it's just, stereotypes left and right and center. They're not subtle at all. And it's just, the girl getting, the plain Jane getting the makeover. But again, it's kind of a part of the Mean Girls movement of girl main character, popular status thrust upon them, etc. Hilarity ensues. Also in the 2000s, we did get a lot of TV shows. A couple of them I have here. Degrassi is the first. Well, I put Degrassi The Next Generation here, because I think when you talk to people about Degrassi, they're going to mention like Drake getting shot. But and that's part of kind of this movement, but it was around in the 80s. There was one back in the day, but they revived it in the aughts, 2001, with a new cast, one of them being the daughter of the teen pregnancy that happened in the show from the 80s. This is the one that when you were watching like Teen Nick, it would be like Degrassi marathon every episode. Degrassi, it goes there, and kind of that movement. So it's known for its drama. It's known for taking on serious issues. Like there's EDs, there's drug addictions, there's pregnancies. It's, you name it, it's happened in Degrassi. So it's one of those shows that's kind of the inverse of the Wonder Years, whereas like the Wonder Years takes place kind of focuses on the family. This more excludes the family and focuses more on the people, and I mean the people at school, the high schoolers, and just how they interact with each other and the kind of the issues they have to deal with. In the same vein as Degrassi is the one I watched as a kid, Glee. Both shows I'd say are kind of known for representation. Glee is, the high school Glee club and the drama that goes on in the you're all minorities, you're in Glee club, Mr. Schuester vibes. But this also tackled a lot of teen issues. We had the addiction, we had the teen pregnancies, we had the show choir drama, we had the steroids, and both of these both of these are just taking on teen issues and kind of representation for the teens. And this is kind of part of the trend that started, I'd say, probably late 80s, mid to late 80s, where the after school special kind of took over and showed the viable market on the TV front for a teen audience. And that's the thousands. Hello, we're in the 2010s. This is where we see a big divergence into a bunch of subgenres. So it's very fun. I'm going to have a lot more media properties to talk about than normal. But to start it off, I'm going to have our quote from our last quote from our man Timothy Shea, the doozy. But he said that this is referring to media literacy, to like teaching media literacy to children, people being aware that they should look critically at the media they're consuming and how to just kind of interact with that. So he said these actions seem to suggest that corporations and our government have some interest in keeping citizens uninformed and or distracted. And if we continue to tolerate these conditions, our children will be raised as victims of the media, and they will not feel the authority to change the situation. So what he's saying is basically similar to Fahrenheit 451, or like 1984, where kind of government authority takes over, and we're kind of left without any option to rebel against the authority. If we stopped teaching people how to look critically at the media they consume, it'll just, as the government is kind of pushing towards, or in this case, that's what Shea is suggesting, that then we will kind of get to a point of no return where, like, even if they do start looking critically kind of at the world around them, they won't be able to change even that. So, in the line of teaching children to be media literate, none of these really play with that theme a lot, but it's something that's happening in just kind of the background of just that's the climate we're kind of viewing these through. So, the first kind of theme I want to talk about is we are once again coming back to the horror genre, but this way we're romanticizing it. That's right. I mean Teen Wolf, the MTV original series based off, I guess it's not original, it's based off the movie from the 80s with Michael J. Fox, where he's a werewolf playing basketball, you know that one? So you know how they there's an MTV version. I'm running out of room over here. Where Scott McCall gets bitten by a werewolf, and he's going to high school. He's on the lacrosse team. He has to deal with that, along with his goofy sidekick Styles Stilinski. You didn't need that information, but I gave it to you. So, basically, I want to talk about season 6 of Teen Wolf, which might not be the best season, but it sure is fun. One thing about this season is that it was filmed at the same time as one of the Maze Runner movies, meaning Dylan O'Brien had to split his time. So he couldn't be in a whole lot of Teen Wolf. That meant they had to write him out of the show. How do you write one of the best characters, the most beloved by the fan base? How do you write them out of the show? You make everyone forget they exist. It's a bold move. I think it pays off. But the reason, or kind of Styles' deal this season, Styles, he's the goofy sidekick. He is the one with, like, he does all the research. He's really interested. He's the only kind of human in the group. If you look on, like, AO3, he's the most popular. He gets taken by the hunt, the wild hunt, and everyone forgets that he existed. But this coincides with his kind of crisis for the season, in that he's scared to graduate. He doesn't want to split up the friend group. He doesn't want to be alone. So by placing this here, we see Styles desperately trying to keep the friend group together, the pack together. Scott is staying back in Beacon Hills to be the assistant coach. Lydia is staying in high school and extra year already to even though she could have already graduated, to stay with the group. And it's just a lot of not wanting to say goodbye, not ready to move on. Also, just throughout the show, the character of Derek Hale, who is a 20-year-old-ish, he's in his 20s at least, who just hangs out with teenagers all day, is a little sketchy, but it also is a part of the larger theme of not wanting to give up your youth, not wanting to move on, not wanting to kind of enter the next stage of your life. They also make fun of him for this. Like, the show views it as weird. But he's also portrayed as a really cool person. He's the broody loner type. He's got the leather jacket. He's got the facial hair. But yeah, Teen Wolf tends to deal with ideals of not wanting to give up kind of your youth mentality. Styles eventually does. He goes to work at the FBI and kind of moves away from Beacon Hills. But some of the other students, as I said, like Scott stays behind. He is assistant coach on the team, and that's kind of like how he keeps part of the pack going, and then he gives it to Liam. So yeah, there's this whole trend of not wanting to kind of move on. Something that kind of portrays this idea with zero... They hit you over the head with it. Is Twilight. I had to talk about Twilight. So the first one came out in 2008. The last one came out in 2012. I think there's 5 of them. But yeah, so Twilight. This is the epitome. This is the definition of let's be teenagers forever. How long have you been 17? A while. Yeah, Edward has been literally a teenager for years, since the last pandemic, some might say. Plus there's this weird rule where if a werewolf is with a vampire, they won't age. I think this was written... I haven't read the books, I've only seen the movies. I think this was probably written to have something to do with Jacob. That's weird. That's suspicious. Bella's whole deal where she's obsessed with getting Edward to bite her so she would stop aging, because she's like, oh, I'm already 18, I'm older than you. Twilight really romanticizes vampirism so much and doesn't place any importance on humanity. She sees nothing wrong with being a vampire, and even after she does it, she only really encounters good stuff. Of course, she does go on the fight, with everyone. That doesn't happen because she had the vampire baby. But she really doesn't miss her human life, except maybe Charlie Swan. But who wouldn't miss Charlie Swan? Charlie Swan appreciation. Something that really Twilight does differently than other kind of supernatural media is that they tend, if it's like vampires, werewolves, anything, ghosts even, they tend to romanticize humanity in the situation. The main character tends to stay human, and kind of that's the interesting thing, that's the draw, that's why the human audience would care, is because they see part of themselves in the human character, and they see the kind of intrigue and romanticization that the protagonist is experiencing when they're looking at these supernatural creatures. Twilight keeps that for a little bit, but then Bella gets bitten and becomes a werewolf. Or, not a werewolf, a vampire. Team Jacob, no. There's no downside to really being a vampire in Twilight. You can be a vegan vampire and you're fine. Not vegan, vegetarian. Or, I guess just not human. This also leads to the young adult vampire pipeline, a la Vampire Diaries, and just all that.
there's a huge movement of romanticizing vampires and just supernatural in general in the 2010s.
I don't need to explain that to you. You lived through it.
So, coming of age movies also just kind of took on lives of their own. One example of this is going into the romance genre. All the Boys I Loved Before is a Netflix series of movies based on a series of books by Jenny Han for young adults, or really teens. It's a coming of age book, obviously. That's why I'm bringing it up here. Where our girl LJ Laura Jean writes these hypothetical, or like these letters that are never meant to be sent out to all the boys she's ever like had a extreme crush on, but it's more for her to vent, and then her sister sends them out, yada yada yada. She ends up with Peter Kavinsky. There's more drama. There's like 3 movies. I haven't even seen the 3rd one, but I want to consider what happens when LJ starts thinking about college. This is where it gets really messy. LJ hasn't learned her lesson from the past 2 movies that she shouldn't try to keep these great orchestrations going. She shouldn't try to keep them secret. In the first one, she tries to keep Josh from knowing that she still loves him by dating Peter, and that blows up in her face. In the second one, she tries to keep Peter and Jordan Fisher, I don't remember his name, she tries to keep those 2 apart and keep it a secret that she's kind of like having a thing for both of them. That blows up in her face, and also her friends don't like her. And now here she's trying to keep a lie going to Peter that she got into the school that he did. She loves Kavinsky, but that's besides the point. LJ continues to do the same thing, lie to Peter, and keep up a ruse in every single movie in the series. She does not learn that she shouldn't do this, although she does, like, at the end of the movie, but she seems to forget that Peter is a person she can talk to and communicate with. This might come more as my frustrations with the movie. I'd say it's a flaw in Laura Jean's character. But really, this college kind of just represents leaving, growing up, especially in teen media, where like a lot of TV shows would use like, oh, they left for college, they're no longer on the show. So by like kind of lying surrounding college and just kind of not knowing where you're going with that, and just kind of being scared to make the final decision, take the final step, communicates a fear of overall leaving for college and growing up and taking the next step if you can't make that decision. In a similar vein, I'd say this could only be described as a coming of age movie. Like, it's not a genre, it's literally the genre is coming of age. Is Lady Bird 2017. I dropped that. It's kind of romance. She has love interests, but yeah, it's a slice of life where it follows our girl Lady Bird through her like last year of high school before she goes on to college. This one is like about wanting to rush your experiences. She wants to have a boyfriend so she can have a boyfriend, so she can have sex. She wants to learn how to drive so she can drive. But at the end, she learns she can slow it down. Really indicative of that is the ending where she ends up in the hospital after like alcohol poisoning, and calls her mom and just kind of, I think, sees her mom's point of view of, oh, maybe I was a little brash in kind of all my decisions and kind of just the way I was acting. It's poignant on that part. There's also an element of being afraid to turn into your parents. She views her mom as someone holding her back, yet they practice driving together. She invites her dress shopping, and you see regret from Lady Bird when her mom isn't there with her dad when she leaves for college. This is really something we haven't seen in a minute, regarding parental relationships with the kids, because
the past ones, they've been like pretty positive or non-existent, but like they don't really come up as a plot point, whereas here Lady Bird growing up is trying to grapple with her mom, who she feels is too different from her, is always judging her, but here she just doesn't, at the end she understands kind of where her mom's coming from more so. She misses her mom. Like, they do spend a lot of time together, and no matter how much of that is clashing, they do enjoy hanging out. So yeah, I think Lady Bird is different from these, wherein she's scared to grow up, really. She just wants to have these experiences because she views them as mile markers of your experience, but she's scared of the prospect of what she's going to turn into, really. I'm going to do something I haven't done in a minute, and I am going to add another genre, musicals, to the board. One of these musicals is my beloved Teen Beach Movie, which does not have tape on it. So, Teen Beach Movie is once again a callback to Beach Party and that kind of aesthetic of Gidget and surfing and just eternal summer. Like, the whole point of West Side Story, which is the movie that they enter, is that summer never ends. That's like the quote that they used in the commercials. I should explain the plot of this first. So Ross Lynch and Maya Mitchell are from the present day, 2013 present day, and they are surfing. They get sucked into Ross Lynch's favorite movie, Wet Side Story. I love that pun. Where it's like, you know, a beach musical where it's surfers versus bikers, Romeo and Juliet, West Side Story theme. But the biker chick falls in love with Ross Lynch and the surfer guy falls in love with Maya Mitchell. They have to like set the movie back on track, yada yada yada. They leave. This once again shows nostalgia for stuff not only from the 70s, but stuff that was created in the 70s to be reminiscent of earlier times. It's wild. I love it. So there's that whole theme of not her. The reason Maya kind of does this last swim, I'm Mac. Her name's Mac. To go swim and like surf is that she doesn't want to leave with her, and to go to the prep school that she agreed to go to. She doesn't want to leave Brady, who is Ross Lynch, because they like started dating over the summer. She doesn't want to do that. She doesn't want to go, and that's why she's like doing all this. But then when she like gets all stressed out and stuff, she realizes that she doesn't need to go, and like her mom would be happy if she stayed there because that's who she made the promise to, her dead mom. So she stays, and she and Brady stay together. But the sequel, Teen Beach 2, is the movie characters coming back into our life. The sequel is about how they can't continue to be together as they were. They break up because Brady doesn't care about school and Mac does. And literally reset the timeline so they can remain in high school longer. The reason the movie characters come into our life is because they're disappearing. Because the character, the girl, Layla, she changes the movie too much, and then it's like a reality shift, and then they start disappearing. So like, you know who can save this? Mac and Brady. So they go to ask them for help. Long story short, they change everything, and then Mac and Brady retcon their meet to be at a school dance that Mac is throwing to be like Wet Side Story. Well, now it's Layla Queen of the Beach themed because they changed the movie. Yeah, this whole thing is not wanting to move on from high school, not wanting to give up your high school relationship for prospects that might be better. It's holding on to this feeling of you don't have responsibilities, you're free to do whatever you want. Another musical from this time period is Dear Evan Hansen. I know it came out in 21, but I can do what I want. So, or the movie did. The movie that everyone saw, obviously. So, Dear Evan Hansen, it is about self-harm. It is about dealing with social media. This ties back to our media literacy point of just what you do with a following that you gain, and like, is it moral to gain this following by through commercialization of your not even friend, your just like classmate suicide. And it's trying to relive your childhood vicariously through this dead guy whose sister you had a crush on. It's messy. Evan really wants to catch up on a childhood that he missed because his parents are divorced. His mom was always working to make ends meet. And then he inserts himself into Connor's place with like loving parents. This is where I'd bring in the song To Break in a Glove, which I don't even know if it's in the movie. I think like that's something they would cut, but it's in the musical where Connor and Zoe's dad teach Evan how to break in a baseball glove, and it's like, you know, something you're supposed to do with your dad. And it's just, again, holding parents accountable for stuff that they should have done maybe for you. But it's also, we live in a society where that's not really always going to be possible for the parents to withhold that part of the bargain. And it's just kind of dealing with that balance. It's important to note that Evan didn't go to college at the end of this. He like made it through. He, you know, admitted he was wrong. Zoe got mad at him. But he worked at like, I think it was Hobby Lobby or something. Zoe went to college. But Evan is still like trying to move on from this event. He's trying to reconcile with himself and be able to get to a point where he can like maybe go to college or stop at least working at Hobby Lobby, because that's embarrassing. So yeah, he learns that kind of you can't you have to be yourself. But like, I think part of it is that he learns mental health isn't really an excuse. You can argue with me in the comments. But I think, yeah, it's just kind of don't lie. And he kind of has to stay in this period where he's allowed to grow for longer than if he were to just like rush off to college with all this on him still. We're getting there. So, The Amazing Spider-Man. It's another point of genre, because we're now in the time period where superhero is basically a genre at this point. Because Iron Man was, I think, 2008-ish. So Amazing Spider-Man, I don't know if it was supposed to be a coming-of-age movie, but it sure comes across as one. Peter, you know, reconciling with his powers is him reconciling with his responsibility of the, like, that he has to now keep control of. It's him realizing that he does have responsibilities now, basically. And then it's also a romance with Emma Stone's Gwen Stacy, and it's him trying to balance that, and it's just kind of the realities of the world crashing down on him, but he does make it through. The fight really isn't a metaphor for like coming of age or anything, but it's just something else that happens. It's kind of in the same line as Buffy, where he is dealing with these balance of responsibilities. I bet you've never heard responsibility in relation to Spider-Man before. Haha. One more TV show I did want to bring into this is our lovely Riverdale. So Riverdale, it kind of it's insane right now, but it used to be just this fun little mystery that was kind of a throwback to like 50s feel good. So again, we have the nostalgia mixed in with like a genre now. 2010s is, I think, a period of time in TV where it's hard to get a show like greenlit if you don't have a kind of a genre to back you up or like a bit of nostalgia. So this is kind of part of that where, you know, Archie was already a property. But I can't say it depicts teen issues. It tries to. It's kind of become a parody, which is interesting. Because the stuff you see, it's doesn't pretend to kind of pertain to kids anymore. And I would like kind of the closest I think I could recommend it to is like late seasons Degrassi, where it's just kind of like, I guess I see how you got there from where you started of just trying to make it more dramatic. But it is aimed at teens, and it kind of depicts a false reality for teens of just what it could be like. But it also is teens growing up too quickly. They're starting businesses, they're joining gangs, they're doing drugs, and the parents don't really try to change this. They might be disapproving, but they don't really have control over these children. So they're kind of like the ones, the teens in the 80s who were just kind of left to their own devices. I think part of Riverdale that really is indicative of this is Betty getting the serial killer gene from her father. It is a form of blaming the parents, and just kind of her having to reconcile with one of her parents' failures, which is again in line with our themes. Now, what are some honorable mentions, you might ask? I might answer. I have 3 of them. The first one is 8th Grade from 2018. This is a Bo Burnham. So yeah, 8th Grade. 8th Grade is about a girl graduating from 8th grade, moving out of high school, and just kind of feeling socially awkward. She probably has anxiety. She like has a little YouTube channel where she tries to put on this different confident persona. She tries to talk to the popular guys. She tries to just kind of fit in, but kind of realizes that it's okay to be her. She doesn't need to try to fall into this pit of social media clout. It's relevant for, I think, modern audiences of just who have also gone through high school with the added element of social media. The next one I have on there is Scott Pilgrim versus the World from 2010. It's Edgar Wright. It's Michael Cera. It's Brie Larson. It's Chris Evans. It's beautiful. It's a part of the subgenre of nerds, I guess. It's more nerdy than Amazing Spider-Man, that's for sure. But it also brings back the connection to music and rock music in teen media. And it also is Scott learning that he has to move on from his teen years and just kind of accept that he is a grown-up and he needs to start doing maybe grown-up things. This is seen, I think, in his relationship with Knives, who is a high schooler. Well, Scott, I think, is at least in his 20s. But he's already graduated and they're dating, and then he has to like pick her up. But at the end, they do not end up together. Thank goodness. And it's him realizing that he can't keep hanging on to this kind of like youthful fun persona. He has to kind of move on. The last one I have on here is The Perks of Being a Wallflower from 2012. It's Logan Lerman, Paul Rudd, Ezra Miller, Emma Watson. It's a kid who his like friend the year prior committed suicide, and he has to kind of deal with moving on, living through that, and just kind of like he is an outcast and trying to kind of make friends in his freshman year of high school. He gets adopted by Ezra Miller and Emma Watson. They're kind of the fun little queer group. They do the Rocky Horror. He joins their friend group. Yada yada yada. He's not okay, but he gets through it, which I think is relevant. And then he realizes that like he can still be friends with the friends that go to college, and he can still continue living his life. It also deals with sexual assault, which is important. So, what do we learn from these movies of the 2010s? I think we learn childhood is something to hold on to. Whether it depicts someone actually moving on from their childhood, or it depicts someone stuck in their childhood, these medias tend to portray your teen years as something worth living, but maybe not get stuck in. That's nice. All right, and that brings us to 2020 or 2022, but whatever. So I've been putting off making this video for about a year now, because I was like, oh, I haven't posted anything, so it won't like matter, there's no pressure. But like I came up with this idea, and then I didn't like know what conclusion to draw from it, so I've just kind of been sitting on this and just like, I don't know what to make of it really. But I think I did, after like putting the whole board together and kind of talking through it all. But so if you agree with me that these movies connect to these overall lessons, and these kind of movements connect to these lessons, I think I concluded something. So the 50s threat of losing the generation to delinquency, that kind of took over any movie that was made for teens or with teens, doesn't really mean anything, I think, in this general movement. But after that, I think everything is connected, so I'll just review these lessons that I have. So I made the executive decision to say that the theme of the 60s was uh-oh science and have fun, man. I think that's valid. So there's that, and then the 70s I have enjoy your childhood while you still can. The 80s was independence is the key to survival. The 90s was perpetual adolescence, or like don't grow up too quickly, really. The 2000s was adolescence as something to overcome, and then the 2010s was childhood as something to hold on to. So, what do these mean? I think that overall we see a trend that starts with having fun, breaking rules, listening to music, and just kind of like being a vibe, and less of like the struggles, and more of just like, oh, this is kind of like what they're dealing with. They're going after girls, they're having friends, they're having parties, they're a bit rambunctious. But over time, this shifts to a form of savoring your childhood as a result of children taking on more responsibility and generally having to mature at an earlier age due to the environment surrounding them. Along with this rush to mature comes with resistance and wanting to hang on to a time when we had none of that, and we were allowed to be oblivious to kind of the greater world. I think that if you look like at the readings, especially too, you see that like children or like the teen kind of the teens of the day were searching for kind of something that they could unify with. And then in the beginning, that was a kind of a resistance movement in like the teen youth, with, I said earlier, like the Summer of Love and that whole deal with Vietnam. And then in the 80s, it kind of came into like consuming, and just kind of, that's, you had your cliques and such. That's that's where all the teen stereotypes come from. And then in the later, we're seeing in that consumption starts when like the drugs kind of become an issue. I don't want to say they haven't always been an issue, because in cinema there's always been this underlying fear inlaid in like getting teens drugs, but like the 80s is kind of when it starts to become something that's like portrayed in media with teens, for teens, that like would appeal to them in kind of a realistic way. And And then so these issues being present and represented just only grows as you go throughout the decades. So I think this also ties into the innovation of technology with having greater access to current world events and a narrative that can be pushed through social media, especially of needing to constantly be up to date with like what's going on everywhere. This is not good for your mental health. I think also your developing brain is not kind of, you're dealing with others, your body's changing, and then you're dealing with all this other stuff, and then that's stressing you out. Especially, they also lack control in their own lives due to a certain extent of like being children, needing to go to school, needing to like deal with the social groups there. So I feel like that's my conclusion. Just some additional points, I guess, that contribute to kind of just how the media we view as teens kind of affect us and like how we perceive world. I think by us having a big back catalog of coming of age media at our fingertips has led to people of like my generation, I'm Gen Z, obviously, I think, by the way I'm dressed, being able to pick and choose what invokes nostalgia for us. So because we have access to like all of these different lessons and they're kind of all combined and you can choose which ones you want to watch, which ones resonate with you. Like you're choosing between all these different movies based on just, a vague description, pictures, titles. This is something that kind of hasn't been existent to such an extent before, because like millennials was like Blockbuster and then DVDs, but like streaming is such a bigger library just available easier. So I think that kind of just what we have to choose which pieces kind of we watch in these formative years that then give us later nostalgia will in the future affect which coming of age movies will be made, in that they would invoke nostalgia from these periods. I think Stranger Things is kind of indicative of that. Like those of us who watched Stranger Things in our formative years are going to feel a nostalgia for this forced nostalgia for the 80s. And like just like deciding to binge like all the John Hughes movies like I did. And it's just like that's what's going to give us nostalgia for this time of our lives. And so we're learning that lesson, but we're also consuming media from all these other decades, if that makes sense. I think I got there. This is seen, I think, in TikTok too, of just kind of like what's popular and just kind of just the access we have to everything. I think this also kind of brings out a bit of a frustration from being able to see these representations of when issues that were relevant to teens were so different to what we were facing. Because like if you look at kind of Dear Evan Hansen and how he has to do with like a classmate suicide and kind of having a accidental connection, and then like not having this connection to his parents, which is something we have seen, but it's compounded with social media and kind of having this presence that you have to do, and like having issues with the whole world when Rebel Without a Cause was contained to the one community and a couple families really. And just there's a bigger scope I think that we're dealing with here. My next note is something about the pandemic making those years feel weird. I think that people of my age and around my age kind of experienced a weird end to your teenhood and a weird period of where you were kind of coming of age. And it's like I don't know, it's weird because like movies portray coming of age as like an event, and I know it's not supposed to be. But I think that because we kind of didn't have graduation, we didn't have a normal like intro to kind of like your next period, your adult, there wasn't kind of anything concrete that you could connect to, like, oh, a next step. I think that made this kind of all feel a little more weird, like the representations on TikTok. But that might just be me. That might just be an observation of my feelings. I think a lot of this also has to do with something to do with your parents and kind of like what they experienced when they were teens and kind of what they want to pass on. Like if your parents even watched movies, if they listened to music, and what they'll give to you. This goes back to like what will invoke nostalgia between person and person, but also how that can be so varied now. Whereas I think it's more noticeable now because you are so connected and you're seeing people from all over, whereas you didn't know how different your community was from maybe a different community. Like you couldn't visibly see it. That's a thought. Basically, don't grow up too quickly and the feeling of the unknown doesn't go away. I'm 21. Shit.